Hello and welcome to The Couch. My name's Rosie Jenner and this is my new podcast, which I'm really excited to be recording today because it's been a long time coming. We'll start off with a little introduction about me, what this podcast will be, and then we'll get into today's episode. So, as I already said, my name's Rosie and I started a podcast called Psych last year, I believe it was. And I really wanted to just talk about mental health and coping, growing as a psychologist, all these different things, but I felt it was quite restrictive. I'd always wanted to do different kinds of podcasts, but as you might know, having so many accounts and things can be quite overwhelming. And I just decided I wanted to sort of combine everything that I love and be able to talk about anything. So The Couch sort of started as a play on words because I'm a therapist or a training therapist at the moment within the IAPT services in England for the NHS, and then it developed into, okay, the couch is somewhere that, when my friends come over we sit on the couch and chat, everything I've been through, everything everyone's ever been through really, you're sitting at a couch in some stage of it, and that's including relaxing and reading books and having a good chat. And then recently I moved house and I got a new couch for a reading room, which I've always wanted to do. It's actually my partner's office, but I decided I wanted a reading space in there so we could hang out together when he's playing games. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to keep going with this little couch pun. We're going to talk about my lovely blue love seat couch, and this podcast is basically for everything. I think it will be primarily for book reviews. Oh my goodness, who is emailing me at this time? And yeah, just a little bit of everything. So where to start? I'm a psychologist. I have a degree in psychology. I started training as a psychological wellbeing practitioner for the Improving Access to IAPT services, to mental health therapies. Last September, I was diagnosed with ME and CFS, or chronic fatigue syndrome, after having COVID in 2020 because I had previous symptoms which can be exacerbated by viruses. So unfortunately I'm still in my training year, and it is very stressful, so I wanted to find a space that felt cozy and comfy, and now having moved house and having this little space on my sofa, I felt ready to start talking again. So I did a few episodes for Psych, and it was around coping at Christmas and about what psychologists do, and it kind of just fell off there really. I had a really big flare-up. I started thinking about the future of my job. I quit my job at Waterstones and never really looked back, but now I'm finally easing off the course, and I just want this little space to be able to express everything that I want to say about things that I love and do. And as I've said in the past, I'm a huge narcissist, so what better place than somewhere where everyone can listen to my ramblings directly on a podcast. So yeah, this is the beginning, I suppose. Today I wanted to do a review of The Society for Soulless Girls by Laura Stephen, because I binge read it yesterday and I thought, you know what, the best way to kick up a podcast, which will primarily focus on books probably, is to talk about the latest thing that I read. So oh my goodness, I initially started this when it first came out. I chased down every shop that I could in my area and I was like, have you got it? And as all Waterstones employees will know, unfortunately they were handing over systems, so they weren't getting any new orders in, and I was like, where can I get this? It turns out that they'd had a huge batch in and they'd sold out the same day and weren't getting any in whilst the system was being restored. I messaged Laura and I was like, what do I do? And she's like, oh no, why aren't my books selling? She's an incredibly lovely person. And I decided to go to Amazon and purchase it because I was absolutely desperate to read it. Little did I know, my partner would get a job that required him to work from home and we'd need to move house. So I then started packing up everything and didn't really have time to read for a very long time. Hence, on my Goodreads, I'm only a quarter way through the goal that I set for myself. But yeah, I finally decided, I was like, you know what, I'm stressed out, we've just moved house, it's been a week, I've got my nice new sofa, I'm going to binge read for the day. So after I had all my patients, I sat down and started reading at around maybe 6 o'clock or 6:30 after we'd eaten, and I did not finish until midnight, and I just kept reading. This book was absolutely captivating. You know, from the beginning, I was, you know, questioning, you know, what is this about? Because it's sold as a Jekyll and Hyde retelling, and I was like, okay, this is right up my alley. Absolutely love the story of Mr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And the first line is, every kid has a moment in their childhood when they realise just how terrifying the world can be. And for me, I was like, okay, strong start, but like, you know, let's keep going. I'm kind of intrigued. And of course, Laura Stephen famously talks about her fear of Mr. Blobby on the first page, which is just hilarious, and I knew that this was sort of the tone that I wanted to read. It's also dedicated to the girls who were born angry, and well, Kieran Millward Hargrave, who I absolutely adore, is the quote on the cover who says, it's a twisty, sexy, smart haunting of a book full of eloquent rage. And I think that sort of sums up what I want to say about that address to the angry girls, because I think it's almost a trend now that we're talking more about women's rage and about how we express it. There's some really great books coming out about you know, expressing yourself as a woman and owning that rage that, you know, we are rightly entitled to. And this is no exception. It's a brilliant book. It's about one girl who arrives at Carvel University. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, and she is basically addicted to investigating what happened to this girl called Janie, or Janine even, back in the 80s. It's set in the 90s, and she wants to find out what happened to her, if she was murdered, if she ended up ending her own life, from the North Tower in the middle of their campus. And she's put into a dorm with the spikiest, most angsty, gothic girlfriend that you could ever imagine. And it's this brilliant combination of huge, towering, halo, sort of Swedish vibes, sunshine girl, and dark, gloomy, angsty, angry goth girlfriend. And it's basically about their lives intertwining through her investigating the murders and through the other girl exploring her own anger and rage and how she might be able to split herself, or how she feels that she's split. But right from the get-go, you don't know right who's the angry one, who's the one that's doing all this Jekyll and Hyde thing. Is it the two of them? Is it one of them? Is it both of them? Is it everyone? It was very intriguing. I really never thought that it would end up the way it was, really. And yeah, it just goes into you know, their daily lives, fallings out, coming together, the exploration of this crime and the supernatural elements that might surround it. And I just thought it was brilliant. It carries you from page one. It keeps you going. Usually I find retellings very not tiring but predictable, in the way that, you know, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen in this because they've taken the retelling and it's, scene for scene exactly the same as the original text. But with the Society for Soulless Girls, I found that it was only really the concept of splitting yourself that was, similar to Jekyll and Hyde. Obviously, there's the peaks and the conflicts and the discussion of how do you pull yourself apart, how do you put yourself back together, and why people do that. But it was more of a discussion and an exploration through the characters rather than a rewriting, which I found really, really lovely. It was sort of a love letter to the original Jekyll and Hyde story, which I really enjoy. I read it in a sitting in my mother's English classroom when I was a teenager, and I thought it was superb. And yeah, I just thought it was, a brilliant book. There's plenty of diverse characters. It doesn't say it on the page, but I sort of interpreted some of the characters to be neurodivergent or autistic. There's a lot of different cultural names, different appearances, hair textures, skin colours. There's a lot of LGBT representation. It is a sapphic retelling, which is absolutely brilliant. I mean, who doesn't want, a couple of girlfriends exploring crime and the supernatural? And just casually littered throughout the world, there's so many different people of different backgrounds, and it's not trying to write their story or anything. It's just recognizing that the world is diverse and that you're going to come across people with different experiences, who think differently and look differently, and I just thought that was really masterfully done. I enjoyed all of the characters. I mean, as I've said about Alice, our little spiky gothic girlfriend, at times I was like, oh my gosh, do you have to be this angry? But I think that she's so sort of eloquent in the way that she tells you why she's angry, how she's angry. She's very aware that she's angsty and frustrating. And I liked that self-awareness. And in Lottie, our sunshine character, you can see that there is a lot of conflict, but also trying to maintain, sort of being the little shining star throughout all the turmoil that she's going through as well. And I think it was brilliant that they were both on such separate journeys that were so perfectly together as well. And that's something that I really, really love about dual perspective books. Although I did feel that Lottie was more of a main character because it sort of started off with her, and her curiosity and her journey to Carvel. And then we sort of encounter a lot of different characters. Hafsa, I think, is absolutely hilarious. She talks in a way that's very familiar to me. She speaks sort of how I do, casually, and how my parents interact with us, my siblings, which I just found hilarious. There's a lot of sort of British colloquialism, which is, it's just so great to sort of be back in that university setting, but in a very British countryside, because it just feels sort of homey. I come from a little, not a town in the middle of nowhere, but I grew up in schools that no one really knew, apart from if you lived in the area. I went to a university that was very well known, but again, I was living at home in a spa town, and it felt very much like almost what Lottie and Alice are doing, and they sort of looked to the North Tower, and I was looking to the parade where I lived, or looking to the cathedral where I went to university. All these central landmarks, and it felt very familiar to me. And then that sort of breaking away and feeling free when you're so far away, but also feeling sort of crowded. I thought it was brilliant, and to be honest, I did think, these are, it feels like a very juvenile perspective sometimes, but at the same time, looking back at myself at 19 years old, I actually wasn't that old. I was very young and naive, and I had sort of the same feelings of not really knowing what I wanted, what I was doing. And I think she portrayed that really well. I think that's something that sometimes can be hard when, you're older than your characters. Sometimes you lose a bit of the perspective that you might have had once, sort of forgetting exactly how you were, but I think it was just brilliantly done. And yeah, I just sort of wanted to talk about how, stunning this novel is. I mean, visually, and it's also exciting for all audiences. It has, very pictorial imagery as well as very character driven, very plot driven, and it's just stunning, really. Everything about it. I rated it 5 out of 5, as you might have been able to tell. I've seen some reviews that are like, oh, their romances here and there, and I think in cases of conflict, when people sort of share those traumatic events, there is sort of a spontaneity about feelings. You never know how you're going to feel towards a person. You might wake up and be like, actually, I shared so much with this person, I never thought about them in this way. There's a lot of sort of shifting in your feelings when you're that age, especially when you're changing from a young adult into throughout that big pivotal moment in your life where you've moved out and you don't know what's going on, and suddenly you're faced with the supernatural and crime. So yeah, I just really wanted to share my thoughts, and I thought that would be sort of a great way to start off this podcast, was sort of give you an idea of my taste. Really, it's a gothic sort of horror young adult book. I would say that horror is my favourite genre of film, of books, games, everything. But I find that it's quite hard to do. I wouldn't say that this book was particularly horrifying, but it is haunting in the way that it talks about various themes and the general atmosphere of it. I wouldn't say it was scary, but there's definitely some more graphic material, and I would say that there are definitely triggers for sort of self-harming behaviours, vague discussions around powerlessness and what happens to women when men are put in charge, those sorts of things. So if you do find that you're easily triggered by those sorts of discussions around power and being overpowered, then maybe steer clear of it. But I found it very accessible and just enjoyable, really, which I find it's a sort of a hit and miss sometimes with YA horror, because they're finding that balance between something that's appropriate for young adults and maybe teens, or more developed young teens, and also that element of adulthood and horrific things and how life really is. So it can be really hard to approach that in a literary setting, especially when it's marketed as young adult. And by all means, I would absolutely love a full splatterpunk disgusting version of this book, but I just thought, as it is, it's it's perfect for the audience it's trying to speak to, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, just having a little look over my emails. Yes, so basically I loved it, 5 out of 5. I don't know where I'll go from here with the podcast. I'm hoping to do a episode on Wreck by Tom de Freston. I think that book's incredible, and I've been wanting to talk about it for so long, but I never felt that any of my platforms were sort of adequate to talk about it in a deeper way. So I feel like this might be the moment. But yeah, let me know what you want to see. I will be posting these to my Instagram, which is the Zodiac Reader _, and that's the same on Twitter. Or you can find me on my main account, which is RosieJenner _. And yeah, this is just going to be a little fun, a little rant. Hopefully I'm not too monotone the whole time. But yeah, I think that's the plan for now. So hopefully I will see you again soon. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and do let me know if you have read The Society of Soulless Girls, because it's worth it and I want to know your thoughts. So I will see you soon, and stay safe. Goodbye.